Hello there. Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
This week, a Republican strategist tells us Trump wants to get close enough to steal the election.
Both sides are feeling the heat, and not just from the French fryer. But first...
In 2 weeks, maybe a little more, Donald Trump will once again be President-elect of the United States with the power to end the world and end most of the criminal proceedings against him. Or, if he loses on November 5th, he'll instead be a 78-year-old about to be sentenced for fraud and facing dozens of other charges that could see him sent to jail for years. So, in light of the gravity of the situation, his behaviour this week was interesting to say the least. For example, in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, he inexplicably riffed about the size of dead golfer Arnold Palmer's penis.
This is a guy that was all man. His man was strong and tough. And I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable. I had to say it.
Perhaps because he had to say it, Trump then felt the need to deny that he was cognitively impaired. In fact, he denied he was cognitive.
The one thing they said that was great, we've watched this guy for 20 years. The one thing we know is that he's got no cognitive problem. I have no cognitive.
Yeah, a number of these kinds of clips have been highlighted by the Harris camp. It kind of goes with this letter signed by more than 230 doctors, nurses and other healthcare professionals demanding that Trump release his medical records. They noted that on August the 20th, Trump said he would gladly release his medical records, and he still hasn't. He's just released a lame letter, as we described last week. The guy's 78. Imagine if Biden hadn't released his medical records at this point in time. Anyway, that all goes with Trump pulling out of a number of interviews this week, including NBC in Philadelphia and also CNBC. And of course, there was 60 Minutes recently as well. Trump's campaign said that he was pulling out of these interviews because he was exhausted. And Harris put all of that together for this line of attack.
His own campaign team recently said it is because of exhaustion. Well, if you are exhausted on the campaign trail, it raises real questions about whether you are fit for the toughest job in the world.
I reckon Harris might have struck a little nerve there, John.
What event did I cancel? I haven't canceled. She doesn't go to any events. She's a loser. So today I was at Fox and Friends at 7 in the morning. I then went to 2 different other appearances. I then made about 15 phone calls. I've gone 48 days now without arrest, and I've got that loser who doesn't have the energy of a rabbit.
Not happy.
Yep, nerve touched. Meanwhile, in Michigan, Trump wasn't entirely sure what to do when his microphone stopped working.
Because to me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary, it's not love, it's not respect.
And for nearly 20 minutes, Trump paced the stage, waiting for the sound to be fixed.
And can everybody hear perfectly now?
At least he didn't start to dance. But most of all this week, Trump was in attack mode against his rival Kamala Harris.
She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, anything you want.
Communist fascist. And then there was this.
We can't stand you. You're a shit vice president. The worst. You're the worst vice president. Kamala, you're fired. Get the hell out of here. You're fired.
Worse even than the guy he tried to kill. But this is apparently Trump's biggest concern.
And most importantly of all, she lied about working at McDonald's.
Now, there is no evidence that Kamala Harris was lying when she made claims like this one.
I had a summer job at McDonald's.
But beyond the fact that there would be no logical reason for Harris to make that up and risk being found out, there has been no hard evidence like pay slips or photographs to prove it either. And that's why Trump thought it'd be a good idea to go to Pennsylvania to a McDonald's this week, which had to be closed to the public for security reasons, learn how to cook some fries, and then serve those fries to a procession of Trump supporters who'd been vetted by the Secret Service.
She never worked here. I've now worked 15 minutes more than Kamala, so it's good. Worked at McDonald's. I'm going to say because she's lying Kamala, that's why.
Again, no evidence that she lied about it. It was a troll and a photo opportunity that had some scratching their heads, but it may well turn out to be the most memorable thing he did all this week. Trump's work experience at Maccas certainly got more media attention than what Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has had to say about the former president.
McConnell called him a despicable human being, stupid and ill-tempered. McConnell also apparently sobbed to his staff after the insurrection, and he privately lamented that Trump should have to pay a price for the attack.
So he's despicable and stupid, yet because this is Mitch McConnell we're talking about, he did not deny the account was accurate, yet maintained that he and Trump are now on the same team, despite prior tension between the two. Meanwhile, Trump appeared at the black tie Al Smith dinner in New York this week, where candidates traditionally crack jokes in aid of Catholic charities.
Tradition holds that I'm supposed to tell a few self-deprecating jokes this evening. So here it goes. Nope, I've got nothing. I've got nothing.
Being self-deprecating about not being able to be self-deprecating is probably about as funny as Trump got in an otherwise fairly mean-spirited roast of his rivals and critics. Kamala Harris didn't even show up, leaving other Democrats in the firing line, and Trump didn't hold back, despite being in front of Catholic church leaders, including Cardinal Timothy Dolan.
I'm surprised that Bill de Blasio was actually able to make it tonight, to be honest. He was a terrible mayor. I don't give a shit if this is comedy or not. He was a terrible mayor. He did a horrible job.
Look, that moment there, that wasn't great, that moment. But I actually don't think the speech was too nasty overall. Certainly not as nasty as Trump's Al Smith speech was in 2016.
He's been worse, is what you're saying.
That is what I'm saying. In fact, after reading out a joke about Doug Emhoff cheating on his ex-wife with his nanny, Trump even checked himself in the middle of the speech.
A major issue in this race is childcare. The only piece of advice I would have for her in the event that she wins would be not to let her husband, Doug, anywhere near the nannies. Just keep them away. That's a nasty one. That's nasty. I told these idiots that gave me this stuff, that's too tough.
And he's still throwing his riders under the bus the next day.
Well, I've had a lot of people helping. A couple of people from Fox, actually, I shouldn't say that, but they wrote some jokes, and for the most part, I didn't like any of them. But I got
Don't blame your writers, buddy. They wrote some normal-sounding jokes.
I'd like to thank our MC this evening, Jim Gaffigan. Most recently, Jim has been playing Tim Waltz on Saturday Night Live, and that'll be a very short gig, I hope, Jim. But unfortunately, Governor Waltz isn't here himself, but don't worry, he'll say that he was. He's going to say he was.
See, that's fine.
Okay material.
The problem was that Trump had about 5 minutes of jokes. They stretched out to about half an hour with just random blather. So it ended up feeling like a slightly better written rally. Then again, at least Trump showed up. The less said about the video that Kamala Harris sent in, the better.
Is there anything that you think that maybe I shouldn't bring up tonight?
Well, don't lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness to thy neighbor.
Indeed, especially thy neighbor's election results.
Just so you know, there will be a fact checker there tonight.
Oh, that's great. Who?
Jesus. And maybe don't say anything negative about Catholics.
I would never do that, no matter where I was. That would be like criticizing Detroit in Detroit.
I swear that was the highlight of the video. Honestly, the rest was worse.
Yeah, I think that's why God invented canned laughter. Meanwhile, Trump megadonor Elon Musk is investing tens of millions of dollars in the former president's campaign. And now he says that he'll hand out $1 million a day in a lottery for registered swing state voters who sign a petition being put out by his super PAC's voter recruitment drive. On top of that, an individual signing the petition can receive $47 for each registered voter in a swing state they successfully convinced to sign the petition as well. To some, though, that amounts to vote buying. And it is a federal crime to pay people with the intention of inducing or rewarding them to cast a vote or to get registered. An offence that is punishable, by the way, with prison time.
The problem is, to enforce that law, you would normally need the Federal Elections Commission to make a ruling. And they'll take about, 3 years, 4 years to do so. And they've got 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats on that commission. So they will be deadlocked. So this is a law that realistically is never going to be enforced. Welcome to America. But while we're talking about Elon Musk, he's been a pretty busy boy lately. He's also been funding another super PAC called Future Coalition PAC. And they've been running what I think is probably the most cynical ad campaign of this cycle. Firstly, they've been micro-targeting large numbers of Michigan Arab and Muslim voters through Facebook and Snapchat about how Kamala Harris is supposedly a staunch and unyielding supporter of Israel with ads like these.
Vice President Harris has chosen a side, her right side. Harris has made herself clear. She stands with Israel and the Jewish people. And when supporters of a free Palestine stood up for Gaza, Harris put them in their place. And supporters of Free Palestine, they hate her, because Kamala Harris gets it.
They hate her. And then they've also been simultaneously micro-targeting Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. But they're claiming there that Harris has been supposedly pandering to Palestinians. And they've been running ads like these.
Why did Kamala Harris support denying Israel the weapons needed to defeat the Hamas terrorists who massacred thousands? And why did Harris show sympathy for college protesters who are rabidly anti-Semitic? And why is she running ads pandering to Palestine? We must stand up to anti-Semitism.
Now, she loves the protesters, so look, that's all pretty dodge. But then Musk's super PAC is also responsible for the majority of the Trump campaign's ground game. That's where you get the voters to the polls. The only problem is that Conservatives have actually seen very little activity from Musk's super PAC in those critical states. They're apparently on track to miss their target of contacting 450,000 voters before the election. And that's if everything is going well. Musk's door knockers have been using an app called Campaign Sidekick, and when they don't have internet coverage, the app doesn't work. So there's no way to actually verify whether the volunteers in swing states are doing what they say they're doing or if they're just skiving off. They could be doing much worse than 450,000 contacts. Meanwhile, Harris's campaign has already visited 600,000 voters personally and also made over 3 million calls. And this all particularly matters to Trump's campaign because while Harris leads amongst high engagement voters, 51 to 47, Trump leads amongst those who aren't very engaged, 52 to 45. So Trump really needs to give his supporters a hard push because they're not engaged. Presumably he pushes them by contacting them. Experts say this kind of thing could mean half a point difference in a critical state like Pennsylvania, John. So this could make the essential difference in the election.
It certainly could. We are talking those kinds of margins. Former President Barack Obama, meanwhile, hit the campaign trail for Kamala Harris this week as part of a 6-day, 5-state swing, including the battlegrounds of Arizona and Nevada. And it was there that he honed his attacks on his successor, Donald Trump, openly mocking him and questioning his fitness for office.
But this is coming from somebody who wants unchecked power, wants the most powerful office on earth, with the nuclear codes and all that. Now, the point is we do not need to see what an older, loonier Donald Trump looks like with no guardrails.
Obama's also been campaigning with the Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz in Wisconsin this week, and he'll make his first joint appearance with Kamala Harris in Georgia on Thursday. Former President Bill Clinton has also been stumping for Harris in Georgia, and Michelle Obama will appear with Harris next weekend. As for Kamala Harris, she has been barnstorming the swing states, scheduling more interviews, many with largely black audiences, including friend of the show, Reverend Al Sharpton, where she hit back at her presidential opponent.
Donald Trump should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. He has not earned the right. He's not earned the right. And that's why he's going to lose.
We'll soon see about that.
We will. She also had an interesting moment, this response to some of her critics in the crowd during one of her rallies.
Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade And they did as he intended. Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally. No, I think you meant to go to the smaller one down the street.
Seems like a fun moment, except it became quite controversial in Fox world this week. If you're not sure why, listen to this enhanced version of the clip by right-wing Twitter.
And they did as he intended. Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally.
Still not hearing it? I couldn't hear anything there.
It sounded like lies, maybe?
Well, Fox News went all the way to inserting different footage in there to make it clearer.
With the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade, and they did as he intended. Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally.
Okay, now I see that footage and I think to myself, it's pretty likely that Kamala Harris did not hear those guys saying Jesus is Lord.
We heard female voices on Harris's microphone. Those other dudes were on someone's phone later.
Yeah, the mic didn't pick up that at all. Those guys became minor celebrities on Fox this weekend. I got to say, having performed on stage myself, I know you often can't understand the person right in front of you. You bluff it, let alone 20 or 30 metres away.
And you get a lot of hecklers too.
I certainly do. A lot of experience there. Look, I expect Kamala Harris might have looked over and seen a disturbance in that Fox edit just then. You saw those hecklers were being thrown out while they yelled at Harris. And so maybe that's what she was referring to, the fact they were getting thrown out. I certainly have seen no evidence either way that Harris had any idea what they actually said. But who cares? On Fox, they had a narrative to push.
I was shocked that any politician would put down the #1 religion in our country and someone yelling out something that's true and so personal to many of us.
That is, in our past, in the history of America, a campaign-killing response.
This became a really big story during the weekend. JD Vance jumped on it as well.
There is something really bizarre with Kamala Harris's anti-Christian rhetoric and anti-Christian approach to public policy. I don't think that's right, Jesus is king, and I don't think that we've seen...
Well, Vance certainly heard that. The thing is, look, I don't know for sure what Harris heard and what she didn't, but I suspect she wasn't literally telling Christians they had no place in the Democratic Party because she herself claims to be Christian openly. But if you live in Fox world, that's all you heard this weekend, that she hates Christians, threw them out of a rally, and that kind of thing can hurt a campaign.
If people actually believe it. Harris has also been campaigning this week with former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who has become a fierce Trump critic, of course, and could even help Harris to win over some of those national security conservative voters. And reports like this in The Atlantic today could help her in that mission. Jeffrey Goldberg reporting that in 2020, after Trump offered to help to pay for the funeral of a Mexican-American soldier who was murdered at an American military base, he was told that the bill for the funeral would be $60,000. He replied, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a fucking Mexican." Trump reportedly then told aides, "Don't pay it." And the murdered soldier's family did not receive a cent from Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the polls this week continue to point to either an excruciatingly close election or possibly a landslide in either direction, with some polls detecting a shift towards Donald Trump, others seeing a surprisingly stable contest, with Harris just enough in front in the places she needs to win. When it comes to national poll averages right now, Harris leads Trump by just under 2 percentage points. That according to the Cook Political Report. That's also the margin in the 538 average of polls. But that margin has halved since August. So there's the shift. And in the swing states, Trump also appears to be making up ground. He trailed Harris by nearly 3 points in the average of Michigan polls 1 month ago. But now there it is effectively a tie. But within that average, there is a big range this week. An 8-point lead to Kamala Harris or a 3-point lead to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and if you want to know why it's so tight, John, 52% of people say they and their family are worse off today than 4 years ago. Compare that to only 39% saying they were better off, and 4 years ago was during COVID. Meanwhile, Trump's retrospective job approval has now hit 50% in 6 of the 7 swing states in the Wall Street Journal poll, 48% nationally in the NBC poll, and 50% nationally in the Marquette poll. So put those two together, and the only surprise is that Trump isn't already ahead.
Yeah, fascinating numbers. For more, we're joined by political consultant Mike Madrid. He's one of America's leading experts on Latino voters. He's a longtime Republican operative and one of the founders of the anti-Trump Lincoln Project. Mike, welcome back to Planet America.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how close is this contest getting, Mike, and what are the implications of that?
I think the race is tightening up. I mean, look, we're at a point right now where you can flood the zone with as many bad polls as you want. There's so many data points that it's not going to move the averages very much. I do believe that Republicans, incidentally, are driving these bad polls, not to change the averages, but because they're trying to set the narrative for their own base voter and prepare them for overthrowing the election. I think that's what's happening. I mean, these people don't care about the 538 average or what's happening on a website. They're trying to make it their own supporters believe that there's no way that they can lose. That's why they're doing it. But the race, I do believe, is probably marginally tightening up. I don't believe that there's a whole lot of movement that can happen. This race has been remarkably locked in for the better part of 6 to 8 weeks now. And as some of us were suggesting, even when Biden was the nominee or the presumed nominee, there's just not going to be that much movement regardless of who you nominate. America is way too polarized to see any change in the outcomes of polling data, the national polls, or in these battleground states.
Mike, there's a decent-sized Latino population in Pennsylvania's mid-range cities. Do you think those Latino Pennsylvanians could decide the election?
I do believe that there's a very good possibility that they will be determinative in the outcome of the elections, especially in places like Allentown, communities surrounding Pittsburgh, kind of what we call the collar counties around Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. They've been exploding in number. For the better part of a decade now, they've been shifting to the right. The Philadelphia Inquirer, paper of record there in the metropolitan area, did a really phenomenal study showing these really, really dramatic rightward shifts happening in the most Hispanic dense communities in the area surrounding Pittsburgh. So it is happening. It is measurable. This is not a new phenomenon to some of us who've been watching Latino voters for decades now. The challenge is in a state like Pennsylvania is, can that be offset by Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's efforts to get more Republican defections over? And this really becomes the narrative of the 2024 election, which is, can the Democrats peel off enough college-educated white suburban voters, specifically women, or will Donald Trump peel off more U.S.-born Hispanic men, most of them under 30, most of them non-college educated? Those are the two discernible demographic shifts happening in American politics today, and whoever's the most successful will likely be the next president of the United States.
Mike, as well as Latinos, Kamala Harris is out there with Liz Cheney this week trying to win over never-Trump Republicans. Are there enough of you out there for her to win this?
There are enough. But again, both with Latino voters and with these never-Trump voters, both of which are my expertise, by the way. I spent 30 years on both of these. The movements will be marginal in either direction. But again, in a race that is historically polarized, history is going to be made on the margins. So in 2020, when I was with the Lincoln Project, Pennsylvania was the state that had the largest number of Republican defections from Trump to Biden. It's just under 10%. If you can move 1% more of Republicans nationally to the left, to Kamala Harris, that's more than enough to surpass the vote totals that Biden got, the margin of victory in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. So when you say enough, that's exactly the right word. There's not many, but there are enough.
Mike, the Harris campaign has been recently targeting black men, but there are a lot more Latino votes out there to be won than black votes. Do you think the campaign's making a mistake there?
That's a great observation. That's exactly right. What I will say is, no, it's not a bad move because both of these demographics are shifting. We are going to have the largest gender gap in American history this November. And it's directly correlate to what we call the diploma divide or the education divide. Those going to college and attending and graduating from college have a far greater likelihood of voting for the Democratic Party than those who don't have a college degree, who are moving just as rapidly to the right and voting for the Republican Party. Curiously, or perhaps not, there's a gender divide along with that. Women in this country are going to college at much greater rates than men, especially Black and brown men. So that in large part explains why this rightward shift is happening, and it's particularly pronounced with Black and brown men, but a shift of just a handful of percentage points amongst African-American men could tip the scales in Trump's favor in both Pennsylvania and Georgia, let alone Wisconsin. So it's a smart strategy. Latinos aren't going to be offended by this. They're not going to view them as him speaking or not speaking to them. They're clearly directing targeted communications to them as well. But perhaps most importantly, they're not using racial appeals as directly as they are economic appeals. And that seems to be the missing ingredient that is effective and is working, is that men are voting more along their gender and class lines than they are their racial and ethnic lines.
Mike Madrid, thanks for being with us again.
It's always great to be with you. Thanks for paying attention.
It's been almost a quarter of a century since an incumbent vice president ran for the White House. And Kamala Harris is going to be hoping that things turn out better for her than they did for Al Gore.
Landing a man. Have a dream. Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on, go play.
At the start of the new century, Americans were feeling good. The dot-com boom was fueling strong economic growth, consumer sentiment was high, unemployment was at its lowest level in 30 years, and heading into his final year in office, President Bill Clinton enjoyed approval ratings around 70%.
We are fortunate to be alive at this moment in history.
Things were so good, Americans largely forgave Clinton's scandals, including his affair with a 22-year-old White House intern.
I've got another confession to make.
Clinton's deputy, Al Gore, became the Democratic Party's nominee, but he had a problem getting any credit for the Clinton administration's achievements, and when Gore talked about what he'd done as senator and vice president, some people thought he had a tendency to exaggerate.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
That don't impress me much.
These are computer disks.
In fact, Al Gore had been a leader on technology and the environment, but in the public mind, he was kind of serious and even dull.
Mr. Vice President, someone finally bought a copy of your book, sir.
Well, this calls for a celebration. I will.
Gore tried to counter those jokes about his stiffness by telling jokes about his stiffness.
How can you tell Al Gore from a room full of Secret Service agents? He is the stiff one.
Gore's presidential rival, Texas Governor George W. Bush, the son of a former president, somehow seemed more relatable, in part because he didn't seem that bright and represented a break from the past.
Pardon me?
In what way?
Well, I just, I think that people need to be held responsible for the actions they take in life.
Yeah.
I think that...
Go ahead, excuse me.
Well, I think that's part of the need for a cultural change.
And comedians had their fun with Bush too.
I don't know what that was all about. But I will tell you this. Don't mess with Texas.
Faced with a choice between kinda stiff and kinda stupid, the election in November 2000 was the closest in history. Bush led by around 500 votes in the decisive state of Florida when, after 5 weeks of recounts and legal challenges, the US Supreme Court ordered counting to stop, and Gore had no choice but to finally concede.
Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And now, my friends, it's time for me to go.
What the hell was that?
Less than 8 months later, America was attacked on 9/11. The Bush administration went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, starting America's longest wars. Turns out the stakes in that 2000 election were higher than anybody thought, Chaz.
Now, Kamala Harris is making the most of Taylor Swift's endorsement with a new Taylor Swift Snapchat filter, only available in Florida and the 7 swing states, coincidentally enough. They're also putting up mobile billboards with this Taylor Swift theme wherever Taylor Swift performs. But Team Trump isn't quite willing to let go of Taylor Swift yet. They posted this definitely copyright infringing mashup this week.
Voting Donald Trump, baby.
Very subtle.
Sounds totally legit to me.
And Trump fans are flying Trumpian messages to Swift over her concerts as well. It's all very unedifying stuff. They need to take some lessons from the master of etiquette himself, Donald Trump.
The 5 stages of romancing Taylor Swift with love expert Donald Trump. Compliments.
I think she's beautiful, very beautiful. I find her very beautiful. I think she's very beautiful, actually. Unusually beautiful.
Fantasizing.
Donald Trump has posted a fake image depicting US pop star Taylor Swift supporting his campaign. AI-generated images of the singer asking people to vote for Mr. Trump was shared on Truth Social.
Rejection.
Breaking news. Taylor Swift, she is endorsing Kamala Harris.
Very public anger.
Donald Trump taking on pop icon Taylor Swift. He posted this, quote, "I hate Taylor Swift."
Denial.
I was not a Taylor Swift fan. It was just a question of time.
And surprise stage 6. Move on to her friend, Britney.
I actually like Mrs. Mahomes much better, if you want to know the truth. But no, I like Britney. I think Britney's great.
That's the 6 stages of romancing Taylor Swift with love expert Donald Trump.
I'm sure they all came in very handy at the Al Smith dinner this week, Chaz. But that's it for this trip to Planet America. We'll be back at 9 p.m. next Wednesday night.
And we're going to Fireside Chat and ABC News on Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. And both shows are on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you there.
Bye-bye.